Hi there and welcome to my 8th tutorial on Java, and in this tutorial I'm going to talk about loops statements. The word loop is commonly used by everyone, but it's, in fact the type of programming is called a repetition or iteration, which basically means the same. And nevertheless, loops are one of the basic features in programming, therefore you have to know them, and it's not an option to learn them or not, as without that knowledge you probably won't be able to create any program that repeats the same action by given number or condition. So this is quite crucial and basic stuff. With loops we will use variables to set conditions. We can also use hard values, but that's very insufficient. So we will not use hard values. It will still work, but we will not use hard values, and variables will be used all the time with the loops. We also have three types of loops. We have a for loop, we have a while loop, and do while loop. So what is the difference? Well, that I will tell you with each loop. So starting off, I will talk about a for loop first. The for loop is used when we, as a programmers, know the repetition count. To be precise, we use the loop when we know how many times it will go round, or even if we don't know, there is a specific limit on the condition. The condition is specified by integers or floats, doubles, or basically any numeric variable we can use with the for loop. And strings will not work with the for loop, as string is not numeric variable, and we cannot count the string, as we cannot increase the string like with the numbers. We can with integer, we can increase by 1 or by 2, stuff like this. We cannot do that with the string, therefore string we cannot use it. But any integers, bytes and stuff like this, we can use bytes and stuff like this with numeric variables. Small note, you can also use characters, and the procedure will not produce errors. That is due to characters values, as though can be represented with integers, and that is why the for loop is allowing us to use characters, but it's highly not recommended. It's not highly actually not recommended. It's not recommended at all, because characters, when we use characters with the for loop, we will basically have no output, or the output will be some kind of rubbish. So you don't want to use characters. The program will not produce an error, but you will not see any output, or you will see some kind of rubbish. So you will not use characters with for loop. So to create a for loop, we start with the keyword for, and then we open the bracket and state our variable. We can declare the variable and assign some kind of value. Then the next statement is to set the condition. We set the condition for the for loop, and then we increment this variable. Yes, all of this is combined in one bracket, and that's a condition, the incrementation statement and stuff like this. It's in one bracket. The next step is simply open and close your curly brackets and write your actions. So this is how it would look like. First, I have a variable. Of course, I don't need to use variables from the beginning, so I will show you two ways. For loop, I can say for, and I have a bracket. Then I create my variable, and I have to assign some kind of value to it. So int I equals 0. Then, for example, I is less than 10. Oh, sorry. I is less than 10, and then the increment statement I plus plus, for example. You can plus it by 2, 3, 4. It doesn't matter. You can even minus it. So depending on your condition, you can do many stuff. You can increment or decrement. So it's up to you what you do. So that's our for loop. Now, if I put some kind of statement inside, let's say system out, and I will print out something, let's say 1. It doesn't matter what I print actually. And when I run this, you will see 10 statements printed out, 10 ones. So each time the loop goes around, it will print the statement, and again check the condition. If the condition is true, it will do it again, and again, until the condition is false. So that's how the loop works, and the for loop works. Well, I have to stress that out, that you don't have to create variables inside. That is, when you use this variable, this one is a local variable. So that means you cannot use this variable outside of this loop. So only between those two curly brackets you can use that variable. For example, here I can print it out. But if I want to use it here, I cannot. So one of the ways to use those variables later on, for example, for different loops, not creating them all the time, you can create variables here without even assign statement. And instead of creating it here, I can just say I equals 0. I don't have to create it then. So that's how you can manipulate your for loop. And as I said, we have a specific count. So we know there will be up to 10 statements printed out. Even if we set a variable which we don't know what the value is of the variable, it still has some kind of limit of how many times the loop will go around. So that's how the for loop works. Also, I should mention that we have to follow the same pattern. So we have this statement, which is assign statement or declaration statement with assign statement. We don't have to create a variable here, but we can. So this statement is first all the time. Then we have a condition. Condition is stated then, and we have separator as a semicolon. Semicolon is separator here. So this one is a assign statement, then we have a condition, and then we have increment statement. As I said, increment statement doesn't have to be plus plus or minus minus. It can be plus equals 2. So it's not limited to just plus plus. And that's pretty much about the for loop. You can add more actions, and also in the future I will show you how to create a nested statement, so you can put, for example, if statement inside, and many more. Okay, so there are different types, as I said, of the loops. So this is the for loop. Now, what about the while loop? And the while loop is a different story. This time we set the condition on the strings. We can set the condition of the strings and any other variables. So we're not limited to just numbers. Also, the counter doesn't exist in the statement like here. We don't have to use actually the counter. We can use a boolean or something like this to check the condition. So we don't have to use the counter. We don't use numeric values only to check the condition. So it's a bit flexible, if you want, with the conditions and stuff like this. Okay, so let me just give you an example of the while loop first. So we have an integer, for example, here, and while loop starts with while keyword, then we open the bracket and we state only the condition. So the condition is inside the bracket, and everything else, actions, are between the curly brackets. So we don't state a assign statement or for example increment statement. We just state the conditions. For example, I is less than 10. I will just assign something to it first. Okay, so now this is different actually. This is the same, pretty much the same as the for loop, because I use the numeric counter. But if this was a string, so if this was a string, I don't know the outcome of how many repeats the loop will do, because I don't know when the condition will be false. Also, we have to have a 100%. We have to be 100% sure that the condition can be falsifiable. That means that the condition has to sometime in some point of your program has to become false. If the condition cannot become false, then the while loop will become an infinite loop. That means the loop will never break, it will never stop. So the program will crash probably, and it will print out the same action for eternity until you close it. And that's why we have to know if our condition is falsible. And that's how the statement can look. We can also use a string. So string, and let's say is equal something like 10. Okay. Now with the string is a different story, and I will say because the string uses methods, I can use dot, and I can choose is equal. Those two is equal ignore case are used to compare the values. So for example, if I is equal 10, let's say, then stop the loop. Now while works on a different basis actually, because while I dot equals 10, then do the loop. So everything but 10 will stop the loop. And the difference between those two, equals and equals ignores case, is that the Java is case sensitive. That means whatever you input, it will be the same as you have to check it under the same condition as the user inputted it. So basically, if you have a capital letter in your words, Java treats it as capital letter. So it matters for Java if it's capital or not. Now with this one, we can omit it. So we can say a word, for example, red in capital, and user types the red in lowercase letter, it will still work because it's the same letters. But if we use this one, equals, it has to be written the same way. So it's better sometimes to use this one. And we can say, for example, 10. Now if I say this and I print some kind of action and I run this, and I don't change my string and my actions, this will become infinite loop. And I can actually show you this. And print line, let's say, and I will print something like well, doesn't matter actually, and I'll run it, and it's an infinite loop. As you can see, it goes and goes and goes, and you will never stop. That's how the infinite loop works, because I cannot, the value will not change, will never change. This loop will never stop. Okay, let's stop this one. That is due to not having some kind of factor which will change this value. So if I say, for example, to change this, let's say I equals, loop will go in one sequence, just print one L, that's it, because the condition after this statement is different, and it will change, and the while loop will stop. Now if we compare previous and this loop, and the main difference is that this one can produce a infinite loops, infinite iterations, infinite repeats, and the other one is basically limited. Also, if we look under the conditional factor, we know that we can use a strings to set the conditions. But also we can combine those like in if statement. So we can say or statement or operator and add something else. So it's not limited to one condition like for loop, which is a bit more useful when we do some kind of complicated conditions. And this is how the while loop works, and this is how you need to remember that you cannot create a condition which cannot be falsified. You have to create a condition which can be falsified. You have to think about this actually. So this is how you create the while loop. Now we have something also called do while, and the do while loop is pretty much the same thing as the while loop, with the difference of the keyword as well as the structure. The overall structure is a bit different, as well as functionality, and therefore I'm going to tell you about those differences and not the conditions you can actually create. So the first difference is we observe and that is declaration itself. So the build and the declaration of the do while is we start with the do, then there's nothing, your actions, and at the end you have while, like so, and you have your condition in while, for example, I dot equals and red, let's say. So that's your condition. Also, you have to place semicolon at the end of your statement, which will close this. It is required as the next statement. If you write next statement here, it will be an error and it will not work. So you have to write this. And this is how the do while looks like. Now the functionality of this is a bit different than in while loop, because whenever our condition is true or false, the action will be printed or executed at least once in this loop. So, for example, even if my condition is false, so while condition is red, my condition states that for this loop to go on, the string must be red. It's not. So if I say system.out.print line, and I print out something like this, this statement actually will be printed out once. See? And the statement is printed out once, then the loops check the condition, and the condition is false, which is not repeated again and stuff like this. That is due to action being first and the condition being last. So the actions are first, then we have the condition. Therefore, the conditions are always executed at least once, and the condition is checked. The actions are executed at least once, and the condition is checked. And then if condition is true, then it will go again and again until it's false. And this loop is also available to produce, able to produce a infinite loop. So you also have to look out for those falsible statements. You have to know if the statement is falsible or not, if the condition is. So that's the difference between do while and while loop. The second difference is the functionality, as I said. And what else can I do here? Well, that's pretty much about the do while and the loops. The tutorial is quite long, I think, but nevertheless it's one of the most crucial tutorials. You have to know the loops, and you have to learn them properly and know how to use them and which one to use when. For example, when you have a known count, for example, arrays have a specific index. For example, you want to print out the array, you will use a for loop probably, because you can state the condition until the whole array is printed out, and the for loop will stop. You can also do this in while loop, but mostly for loop is used. While loop is mostly used when you, for example, get the user input, and the while loop will go until that input is false or something like this. So different types of uses, different type of operations you can achieve with those loops. Have a look around with those loops, play around and stuff like this. As I said, and this pretty much concludes the tutorial. I've explained all the types of loops we have in the Java. Uses are pretty simple, I showed you, and just you have to play around with them yourself. In meantime, you can visit my webpage and YouTube channel for more tutorials, and if you like my videos, subscribe on the channel or my videos, and there's still more tutorials to come. I will see you in my next tutorial. Bye.